Thanks, Daphne. Well, welcome everyone. So excited to be here today. Today is a very special day for so many different reasons, and we'll talk about some of those here in a second. I see a lot of familiar faces who are returning. Thank you so much for coming back. And I see some new faces too, so that's wonderful. And today, for our final seat at the table event of our series for 2021, I cannot think of a better way to end the year. We have an incredible guest with us today, Kelly Montijo Fink, and we will talk all about her and listen to her here in a second. But first of all, of course, we would not miss the opportunity to introduce everyone to you first. And Stephen, I'm going to start with you. Stephen King, Executive Director of the Des Moines Arts Festival. Stephen, I know how important not just today is, but every day is for all of us to honor our veterans. So before we get started, I know that you have a few words you would like to say in honor of our amazing veterans.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a seat at the table. Yeah, today is Veterans Day, and we'd like to start our time together today by just saying thank you to all of our veterans for serving our country, for protecting each one of us, and preserving our country's fundamental rights and privileges. We respect you so much and honor you and your commitment. I know that a lot of us on this call today don't fully understand all the sacrifices that you've had to make, but we just can't thank you enough for your service. We don't take them lightly. We don't take our freedoms for granted. And I respect you so much for the part that you've played in making sure that we have those freedoms in place. So thank you, Kate, for that opportunity to say that.
That was wonderful. I have goosebumps. Thank you so much for that. Well, in my time here in Des Moines, Stephen, I've heard pretty much from day one that no one puts on an arts festival like you do. And one of your reviews, one of many reviews of yours, says good things about this show. Where do I begin? This is the most professional show I have ever had the honor to be a part of. It starts from the first communication from Stephen King, the executive director. Every detail is provided. Stephen, we're so fortunate to have you here in this amazing city, and grateful for all you do for our community to uplift arts and the voices that accompany all of the beautiful art that we are so grateful for. Stephen, say hello to our audience and tell us about yourself.
Well, hello. That's very kind of you, Kate. I don't do it alone. I work with a great team, both Daphne and Colleen at times, and also just an incredible group of volunteers, a great board that we have that works with the Arts Festival that truly believes in arts and culture and what we can do to empower artists and empower our community. And I appreciate so much just being connected with a community that makes space for these kinds of conversations. It's really keeps us motivated, keeps me motivated to continue to do more. So certainly welcome all of you. Look forward to more conversations like this. Just very quickly, we just celebrated, we are going to celebrate our 25th anniversary in 2022. Can you believe that? 25 years of the Des Moines Arts Festival. And I see a few folks on this call that have been around probably that long to know what it was like down on the bridges and have been with us for that long period of time. It's been a great honor for me to be here 15 years. Next year will be my 16th festival. And as a matter of fact, I am here today with you from San Antonio, Texas via Zoom because I'm attending the Texas Festivals and Events Association conference down here. And I can't tell you, especially over the last 20 months, what it's like to be amongst my people down here as we all work towards getting festivals and events back up and running across the country and around the world. So Thank you. And Kate, thank you. Thank you for all you've contributed to this program. It's been very, very, very important.
Thanks, Stephen. Next, I want to introduce to everyone Daphne Dickens, who, normally Daphne doesn't say much about herself on these events. Daphne is the product and program manager for the Des Moines Arts Festival, and I've had the chance to get to know her over the last year, and absolutely delightful individual. So today, we're not going to let Daphne get off as easy, and she's going to tell us about herself.
And I really like doing behind the scenes production. I like build the stuff and then you all enjoy it and then tear it all down. So, so yes, I've been with the Arts Festival since 2018. Like Stephen said, we have a really great team of event management team members, interns, general volunteers that help us build the festival. The past year has been really fun to be able to kind of take that past the 3-day festival and what our organization does in the community. So from our education, art services to actual artists and working with different companies and organizations to launching this series kind of organically, during COVID and during the pandemic when we weren't able to do a 3-day festival. So it's been really fun to be able to expand on these ideas that always go back to our strategic plan and our mission to impact lives through the arts here in our community. So thank you. Excited to hear more about Kelly, and Kate, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Daphne. And, like I said, this is going to be our final event for the 2021 year. As Daphne said, this really started as, kind of a grassroots. It was an organic evolution. We wanted to be able to keep people connected. And, with the onset of so many different movements and just all of the different waves of emotion over the last several years that our country's seen, we wanted to not just make space, but safe space, right, for these critical conversations. And I think it's important that the concept of a seat at the table that I share with everyone, that we're not here to tell people what to think or how to believe, or whose voice is most important. What we're here to do is spark curiosity, increase awareness, and like I said, most importantly, create a safe and welcoming space so that we can have a tremendously impactful, important conversation. And, again, we just really hope that we can inspire action to learn, the desire to lean in. And before I introduce Kelly to all of you, I think it's important we remember that Kelly does not represent the entire American Indian community, right? And a lot of times what we see is, the tendency to take one person's voice and then paint that, right, as one big brushstroke for everyone. And while Kelly's voice is incredibly valuable, and you'll see that, brilliant, right? But I also think it's important just to say and remind all of us that we don't want to give the impression that we think Kelly speaks for all American Indian and Indigenous peoples. And so without any further ado, because all of you are not here to listen to me speak, I want to introduce to you the incredibly talented, brilliant, and captivating guest today, Kelly Montijo Fink. Today, we're going to have an open dialogue from Kelly's perspective about the American Indian identity and how it's communicated in and through art. We really want to walk through a number of ideas and concepts that explore how Native American people, culture, and art has influenced and shaped American people, culture, and art. And, we're going to tackle some really basic principles and ideas, but we're also probably going to bump up against some uncomfortable areas of exploration as well. So I'm going to read a little bit of Kelly's bio to you because I think it's important for you to know how accomplished and like I said, brilliant Kelly's talents are. Kelly Montijo Fink, Apache, Mexican, Spanish, is a bilingual educator, international speaker, and award-winning singer, songwriter, and recording artist. Kelly is in her 26th year as an adjunct instructor at Kirkwood Community College, teaching both Spanish and English language acquisition classes. Kelly has a master's in Spanish linguistics from the University of Iowa and received a BA from Cornell College, double majoring in anthropology and Spanish. She received a certificate with honors for completing a year-long study of language, Latin American and European studies from the Fundación Ortega y Gasset in Toledo, Spain. During 2013, she has served as on the Iowa Commission on the Status of Native American Affairs, currently serving as the vice chair. As a singer, songwriter, and recording artist, she's won 2 NAMMYs, and if you're not familiar, that is the Native American Music Awards, as well as having received an Indigenous Music Award nomination in Canada. Kelly, welcome. We're so fortunate to have you with us today. I'd like to start with having you just share a little bit about yourself. Take us on a journey so the audience can get to know you better.
All right. Well, thank you. As you said, my name is Kelly Montijo Fink. Before we go on, though, I do want to acknowledge, because Stephen had acknowledged the role of the vets in our nations, and Native people have served the highest per capita involvement in the U.S. military of any people group in the United States. So I personally want to acknowledge our Native vets as well before I talk about myself. So and thank them for their service. So my native name is White Sparrow. It was given to me by a fellow musician named Jan Michael Looking Wolf from the Kalapuya tribe in Oregon. I was born in California. I wasn't raised on a reservation or among my Apache people, but rather more in Mexican communities where my family lives. So my tribe, it's matrilineal, which means we trace our lineage through my mother's line, our mother's line. And I always knew about my Indigenous heritage, but it wasn't talked about much, and I'll mention why. I really felt like there was some level of shame in sharing that knowledge. So, for example, my maternal grandmother was physically abused for speaking Spanish at school. So if you think about that, why would she even talk about being Native as well? We can call that generational shame or insecurity, as I would later identify that in my life. For example, as a young girl, I remember not wanting my hair braided. Nobody told me anything about it. Nobody said how I looked with my hair braided. I just, in my mind, I looked too different. I looked too ethnic. And so that was for the community I was living in an agricultural area in the Central Valley in California. I just felt different. Fast forward to my 20s, I began to experience things like in grad school, other natives seeing me on campus, and which was the University of Iowa, by the way, for grad school, but to call me out for like, why aren't you gathering with the rest of us? And then I had a series of dreams, a number of dreams about my identity, my Native identity, and about my history. And one dream in particular was really powerful. I saw the face of a man who I just knew, just kind of instinctually in my dream, that he was one of my ancestors. And so I knew there was this call to come back home, in a way of speaking. I began to see the importance of who I was created to be, and it was time to deal with that generational shame and reclaim my identity, which in honesty has been pretty cool because it has set my family free to be proud of who they are. And so I feel like that's part of that healing process that hopefully we'll talk about a little bit more.
Thank you, Kelly. So again, we're gonna wander a little bit today. And for any of you who have joined us before, you've seen us work with a panel of amazing guests. And after a fairly lengthy discussion about this particular event, we decided that it almost seemed like we were rushing forward by jumping into just having another conversation about art and focusing really on the art component. we feel strongly that there's quite a bit of catch up to do regarding the American Indian identity and experience. And so we really wanted to give a lot of focus and sort of take a different approach to this conversation today. And again, because of Kelly's background and expertise, we wanted to be able to really focus on her experience and be able to um, draw on her stories and the education that she can share with us today. Kelly, in all of my many conversations that I've had, one of the things that comes up frequently has to do with land acknowledgements. And so I would ask you in the most humble way if you would be willing to grace us today with the land acknowledgement and um, help us understand more about the purpose, when we should do this, why we should do this, how do we do this so that it's given the right amount of respect and uplift?
Sure. First of all, I want you to know that while I was thinking about preparing for this interview this week, I take walks in the morning, and the first thing that popped into my head was we call it a land acknowledgement, but we don't call it a people of the land acknowledgement. But that's essentially what we're doing. And so I would ask, really, why are we doing it for any organization or entity? What's the purpose? Because by speaking a land acknowledgement, you're saying this land wasn't discovered. There were people here already. So you are making a statement, and are you willing to stand by that statement? And then what are you going to do with that knowledge and that information once you have it? What I want to read was what I read at the flag installation ceremony at the state capitol in Des Moines, which is an acknowledgement of the people of this land. This was in January 2020. But I do want to say that the whole idea of a land acknowledgement comes from historical protocols of Native peoples, both in the US and Canada. When two tribes would meet, and I'll share a story later about how Iowa got its state name from the Iowa and the story behind that name. But when two tribes would meet, before any business was conducted, they would have an exchange of gifts, and they would sit and they would be social. And so there was this interaction going on. And what later you're going to play some audio tape for us, and I'll comment on that too. And it has to do with that audio. But this protocol was how you do good business, right? How you ask permission to be on somebody's land, how you don't assume that you can do whatever you want on somebody else's historical land, right, where they've been. And it's a way to show honor. So keep those things in mind as I read the statement that I read from the flag installation ceremony. 48 other states in this nation have chosen to honor their First Peoples in many different forms in their respective capitals. We are proud to announce that our day has finally come. The Iowa Commission on Native American Affairs flag joins the flags of the tribes who currently have a land base in Iowa, along with other tribes who have had a historic presence within the state's boundaries. We announce with great joy the flags of the following nations to be on permanent display here at the Capitol in Des Moines. But before I read the names, you'll note that two names are given. One, or often the general public recognizes a name for a tribe that wasn't the name they had for themselves. Sometimes these given names were slurs or slanderous, much like the Lone Ranger's sidekick, who was called tonto, which is Spanish for stupid or foolish. Most tribes' names for themselves recognize themselves as human beings or the people. Ironically, this was the argument among lawmakers before 1924 when Native Americans became U.S. citizens. We weren't considered human. So as I read the names of the people that they had for themselves, I will tell you the meaning in an effort to bring restoration of identity, language, and who we are. So first, Citizen Potawatomi Nation, Nishnawbe, the keepers of the sacred fire. Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, Bakoche, the people of the gray snow. Iowa of Oklahoma, Bakoche, the people of the gray snow. The Sac and Fox tribe of the Mississippi and Iowa, Meskwaki, the people of the red earth. Minnesota Chippewa tribe, Anishinaabe, original person. Omaha tribe of Nebraska and Iowa, Umonhon, the upstream people. Oto, Missouria tribe, Chiwere, the people of this place. Ponca tribe of Nebraska, Usni, the upstream people. Rosebud tribe of South Dakota. Sinkanju Oyate, Burnt Thigh Nation. The Santee Sioux tribe of Nebraska. Isanti, the people of the knife camp. And the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska, the Ho-Chunk, the people of the big voice. Today we honor the host peoples of this land and those who cared for it, allowing us to enjoy it today. Thank you, and we declare a blessing and peace over the land. We acknowledge the ones who have gone before us and have made a way for us to be here today.
Thank you. I'm speechless. So when we do a land acknowledgement, do you feel it would be more appropriate or more respectful to call it a people of the land acknowledgement?
Yes, for sure. And really, there's weight to that idea. So I think the fact that we're calling it a land acknowledgement even adds a little more distance between that idea, because even though embedded in those acknowledgements are people, we're not calling it people, we're calling it land, because we're standing on the land, but we're not acknowledging the people, even though we are technically in the acknowledgement, if that makes sense.
It does. And by putting distance, do you feel like that has been subconscious in Americans' memories? So as to, again, put distance from the emotional part of the people, or do you feel like that happened just over time? I was wondering if you could expand just a little bit more on that distance that you talked about.
Possibly. You know, it makes me think of years ago, I saw a speech given by who was then the curator of the National Holocaust Museum. And one of his comments really has stuck with me all this time. And it was, we're really good at memorializing people, not so much about present day, like interactions with, and I can't get this word for word except for that first part. We're really good at memorializing people. So there's that distance again. We feel comfortable with that when there's that distance between us and them, whoever them are, whoever the others are. We're good at that. It's a comfortable place to be.
Yes, thank you for your perspective there. I'm curious, because kind of spinning off of this part of the conversation, in your bio, I noticed you identify right away Apache, Mexican, Spanish, right? And then of course, you're a woman and you're an artist and you're a musician. How do you identify? What is your if you were to explain to somebody your identity, how would you put that?
I think exactly as you said, all of the above. One doesn't make me less of any of the others. It's it's the fullness of who you are, right? And I think it goes back to that shame, right? Are you ashamed of any part of you? Then you have to deal with that shame, because you can't be fully who you are if you're not fully who you are. So I would say all of it. All of it. Absolutely all of it. I call it the Southwest mix, though, the native tribe with Mexican and Spanish. That's typical of Arizona, California, Texas, all that whole area of the Southwest. New Mexico for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you were telling us a little bit about your journey and your life story, and you talked about some of the shame that your family experienced, how much of that part of your identity continues to pop itself up in your day-to-day life? Have you ever felt yourself leaning towards one identity more than the other? Or have you ever selected different identities at different times that served you better in different situations? And for myself, I would use the example of being, Korean American, Asian American, Asian female. I mean, I could go on. And for me, if I'm being completely honest and transparent, there have been different periods of my life where I felt more comfortable using certain identities to describe myself than I did others. And that had to do with me and my own awareness of who I am and not feeling comfortable yet growing into being my full self. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in that regard?
Maybe growing up, growing up in certain communities, you feel more akin to the community. Certainly, like when you're checking the boxes on any form, when they ask you to identify as whatever, and you have to push two boxes because you don't fit into one box. Are you Hispanic or Latino and Native American? Well, that's not under the same box. So sometimes I write in other things because I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't fit into your boxes, but this is who I am. So I approach it more that way, but I know certainly other people perceive me in a certain way. I had somebody here in the community who's become a friend. When one of our early conversations, she asked me, how does it feel not to look like anybody else in Iowa? And I went, it's how you're perceived, right? But when I traveled into Oklahoma, this was a wild experience because people sometimes they don't, if you look a little different, they don't quite know what to do with you, but they can't place you. But Oklahoma, which larger native population than and concentrated populations than here in Iowa, I walked into a restaurant with my family. I'm talking about my husband and my in-laws, who are German background. And I tell you, the whole restaurant just turned and looked, and I felt like, oh wow, there's some stuff here between natives and non-natives because I just felt the brunt of it by those looks. And they weren't looking at anybody else in my family. They were looking at me. And so, you feel the weight of that. It's not that you've changed your identity. You can't change what you look like. I mean, I could dye my hair and put in some color contacts, but it's the way you're perceived a lot.
I thought it was interesting when you were talking about, when you go and fill out any form these days, right? Are you between 15 and 18 or 21 and then you get, so that's the age
Yeah,
demographic boxes, and then you go down to gender, right? And it's like, okay, all the different choices, and then you get to race and ethnicity, and to your point, the boxes are, you know
yeah,
the list gets longer and longer and longer, and for
yeah.
whatever reason, and I mean there are so many different reasons for this, but we've become this unbelievably, I don't know, culture focused on checking boxes
Mhm.
and keeping everything so linear and so separate. And I find that even in these conversations where, we see this huge wave of DEI, focus on culture and multiculturalism and inclusion, yet the way we talk about these things in many ways hasn't changed because we continue to have, right, like the African American experience and the Asian American experience and we just keep going down the line. You know, as an educator, what do you say about siloing all of us as people and all of these ways in which our society has made us very one-dimensional or unidimensional or fairly flat, right?
Yeah.
People with one or two attributes that we check boxes for versus coming as, like you said, who we are, um, and being multidimensional, full functioning people. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I understand kind of corporate, company, governmental ideas of having to quantify citizens. Now, this brings up a really interesting story because, at least now we're able to self-identify. In the past, when people took censuses, it wasn't them individually responding. There was a census taker. And the reason why I'm saying this is really interesting is because um, two things converged recently for me. I was reading the book called Indigenous Peoples: History of the United States. Excellent book, by the way. But the author was talking about how and this was in the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, those states had been required before they were states, when they were just territories. The US government was saying you need this number of population of white people to become a state. So at the same time, my aunt, who has done a lot of our lineage, our DNA, what do you call it, ancestry tracing, you know, and then I was like starting to look into it. And my great grandmother, who appears on the Mescalero Reservation, one of the census times, another time she's not. And we're Chiricahua, so the Chiricahua were the last to resist the reservation system. So a lot of Chiricahua went to other reservations. They were, you know, if they ended up on a reservation, it was on somebody else's reservation. Anyway, to get to this, so I'm looking at this roll, and it's the 1910 census. It's not on the reservation, but she's marked as native, obviously, on another census. Here, 2 years before New Mexico becomes a state, she's marked as white. And I'm looking down the rest of the census, obviously taken by a census taker. And it's really interesting. They have, you know, language, English, or other. Half of the people on this list are other, and they're all listed as white. And I'm like, wow, this is really telling. You know, it was political, which in some cases we can look at it, what's changed today. You know, there's some political reasons behind it, but coming into statehood, how many times over was this done, where people were reported to benefit whatever government wanted at that point? Just really fascinating to bring it home personally to see that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It is interesting. And again, I you know, for you to bring up the idea that it was political, you know, and I think that we continue to see a lot of these kinds of ideas and concepts that we talk about play themselves out on, you know, political stages. And, you know, we're not here today to talk about politics, of course, but certainly your story is enlightening. And, you know, I think this leads us again to another question that, you know, oftentimes when we have these conversations, people will really sort of focus in on just kind of the basic principles. And one of the reasons why we're not always talking about some of the things we should talk about is because we don't always know how to talk about it. And I think there is a fear, there is a real, genuine fear of saying the wrong thing. And you know what, Kelly, it is not your job or anyone else's job to educate all of us about the entire American Indian experience, certainly. And oftentimes, you know, we as a society will put people like you in those roles to either be the voice for or educate on behalf of an entire community of people. But again, help us have these conversations in a better way, in a more comfortable way. One of the questions I've heard many times is when it just comes to best practices of naming and speaking about the American Indian experience. I have people say, look, Kate, I don't even know what to say. Is it American Indian? Is it Native American? Is it Indian? Is it Native American Indian, Indigenous? What's right? What is right? And what do we need to do? Where do we go to get those best practices so that we can all have the conversation without that fear of, you know, judgment or being seen as discriminatory or being seen as a racist because possibly we use the wrong word or the wrong term. Help us learn a little bit about that.
I think, you know, you kind of indirectly answered your question with the way you formed the question, because you could ask 10 different people and get 10 different answers, really. And I mean, 10 different Native people and get 10 different answers because it's personal preference, right? And so obviously some people reject the word Indian because it's a misnomer. We're not from India. That was just an error, right? But it's something we've taken on because we have publications like called Indian Country Today. We use the abbreviation NDN as Indian, referring to ourselves in text speak. So I know a lot of people are moving away from that terminology today. And some people will say, you know, Native American, but I think if you ask most Native people, okay, so Native American is like a pan-Indian term, right? But people will go with their tribe, their band, and even their clan names. They will introduce themselves. And that traditionally, that is a way to introduce yourself. You tell your tribe, your band, and your clans. And if you speak the language, you speak that in your language because that shows honor to your people. So generally speaking, I think most people will, you know, use native if they're talking generally, but specifically, for example, they'll use their name. Now, going back to that acknowledgement that people acknowledgement that I read earlier, there is the use, a reclaiming of the use of the names we had for ourselves, or autonyms are called. Exonyms are names other people call you. Autonyms are names you call yourself. So instead of Navajo, the use of the word Dene, which is simply the people. Most people don't know Dene, they know Navajo, because it's the one of the largest tribes other than Cherokee in the United States. But there is that restoring of honor by speaking your own name for yourself, not names that other people have called you. So in Canada, they prefer the term Indigenous if they're talking about across the board, across the nation, Native peoples, they will say Indigenous over Native. So it's always good to ask. I believe if you ask truly seeking an answer and not flippant or, you know, disrespectful, people will respond to that. I think any kind of mutual respect conversation, people respond well to that. So,
You know, you mentioned tribe, band, and clan.
mhm.
Would you be willing to expand on that a little bit? Help us learn more about the differences and how we can identify, you know, a clan name or a band or a tribe. Tell us about each one of those.
So, for example, the Apache people, they're Mescalero, they're Chiricahua, they're White Mountain. So all of those are bands, smaller groups of the main tribe speaking the same language. And then the clans are your lineage, your parents. You're going your mother's father, your mother's mother, your father's mother. So that's what that means. And they're associated with a clan, a smaller group. So if you kind of look at it going down, trailing down from large, the tribe is the larger entity, the band is the smaller, and then the clans are the familial lines.
Wonderful, thank you. I think another challenge we have when we're trying to have these conversations, and possibly one of the reasons why certain histories are not told or we don't have the same exposure. You know, it's so difficult to even articulate for me what the challenges are, because when I look into the conversation that we're having today, I see so much missed opportunity. And, you know, we as Americans, generally speaking, and I hate to overgeneralize, but we honestly have very little idea about tribal culture, language, art, music, what's authentic from what's co-opted, right? What we haven't even, I think, touched the surface of what's out there. Our education, our history lessons, you know, I know in my generation, we were given a slice, right? In one perspective. It was maybe one chapter in the American history book that I remember being taught from. It was maybe one chapter or two chapters in the Western Civ class, right, that I took as a requirement or in college. So this all plays into how we end up where we are today. And we're going to play a small clip for everyone to kind of lead into this part of our conversation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the current very popular series Yellowstone, which is a Paramount production, starring Kevin Costner. And there is, in season 2, episode 2, around 7-8 minutes in, Monica, who is who's native, is also a professor, and she is teaching. They show her in one of her classrooms, and so we're gonna play this little excerpt for you. I don't think you're gonna be able to see the video because of possible copyright issues, but we do want to play the section, and then we're going to have a discussion about that.
Misogyny, how refreshing. You can work in a Pocahontas joke, you'll hit the trifecta.
Now you mention it.
What's your name?
Trent.
Can you tell me the definition of power, Trent? It's the ability to direct or influence another's behavior or course of events. That's what I have. I can remove you from this class and fail you, or I can send you before the dean for violating the student code of conduct. These are all things that can alter the course of your life. That's power. And you don't have any. When Christopher Columbus first came in contact with Native Americans, it was the Arawak people in the Bahamas. I'll read to you from Columbus's journal. They willingly traded us everything they owned. They do not bear arms and do not know them, for I showed them a sword, they took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They will make fine slaves. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. You ever feel like that, Trent? You ever feel like making someone do what you want, whether they want to or not? It's a very European mentality, stemming from the oppressive political and religious structures of the Renaissance. Kings and priests with absolute power ruling masses who have none. That was the mentality of the men who discovered America. And it's the mentality our society struggles with today. What you know of history is a dominant culture's justification for its actions. And I don't teach that. I'll teach you what happened to my people and to yours. Because we're all the descendants of the subjugated. Every one of us.
Thanks, Daphne. So Monica is from the Yellowknife tribe, and Kelly, I have no idea whether that is the tribal name given or that is claimed. So excuse me for my ignorance there. But again, this is from the series Yellowstone, and I encourage anyone that would like to watch that again and see it in context to take a look. I found it to be incredibly powerful, but I thought that her way of explaining some of the challenges that I think we're all aware of, I definitely couldn't have said it in that way. So, Kelly, share with us your thoughts about what we just listened to.
Oh, there's so much to talk about.
We have time. We'd love to hear whatever you think here.
what she says about power is true. It's a very European view of power because the chief, the most powerful man in the tribe, was often said to be the poorest because he would give to those who need. His whole job was to protect the people, to provide for the people, make sure his people were taken care of. And so that was power, to be able to care, to be able to support, to be able to protect. And even in battle, they say, maybe you've heard the phrase counting coup, and that's certainly among the Plains tribes, you would hear that. And that was when a warrior was in battle, instead of showing like I could wipe anybody out, it was touching somebody with a stick, getting that close and riding off, because you were showing restraint, and that was power. So the whole idea of power is so different culturally. But it's interesting that she takes the perspective of I have power. Well, she's saying I have this European power now because I'm in authority as a teacher over you. But what she talks about with reading this, the Journal of Columbus, that's when we go back to the protocol. When he's saying the Arawak Indians were giving their stuff over, they weren't just saying, here, conquer us. They were protocoling Columbus, expecting something in return. They were expecting gifts in return. So there was a cultural miscommunication going on there, and perceiving it one way and having, failed expectations on the other side that, hey, wait, they're not protocoling us. This is what we do when we meet new people, and they're coming to our land, and so we're gifting them and welcoming them, and they're not, responding. And a lot of those ideologies that she talked about come back. Okay, so Native people also think generationally. Some people may have heard the phrase the seventh generation. We think in terms like even the Meskwaki. Let me bring this up before I go way, way back. I had a friend who was a councilman on the Meskwaki settlement. This is back in the early 2000s, and he casually mentions in a conversation that, oh yeah, the 100-year lease is up. I'm like, what? And he says, yeah, we had a 100-year lease with the people of the Amana colonies. They were seeking religious freedom. And I'm like, we think in terms of a 6-year car loan, 30-year mortgage, never a 100-year land lease with people that want to settle and live peacefully on your land. So it's just like, wow, that's a long time. So that's thinking generationally. And so what I was going to say before is the whole idea of the doctrine of discovery. Maybe you've read about that in your history books. But the whole idea was if there were lands that were not populated and ruled by white land-owning males, then you could take those over. Those were open game, right? And if you even look at the Constitution, which counts the original Constitution that was written, well, first of all, the Declaration of Independence calls Native peoples merciless Indian savages. And then the Constitution, the original document that was written, only includes people's rights if you were white land-owning male. And it counts African Americans or African slaves as 3/5 of a person. So we go back to that whole idea of who's human, who's not. And the irony of what I told you before, that our names for ourselves, we call ourselves human, the human beings, the people. But yet these others were not calling us human. And so that's why, and these are documents we look to and we uphold as standards, but I think there's a problem if this is generally, and people wonder where generational mindsets come from. We have it documented that these are the only people with rights. Women aren't even mentioned as having those same rights in the Constitution. We just assume because we read through 21st century eyes, oh yeah, all men are created equal. That means women too. But that's not the way it was written. It's not the way it was intended. So what do we do with that?
That's extremely powerful. And, normally when I do facilitation or have these kinds of conversations, I don't get too tongue-tied, but today and for this conversation and for other similar conversations that I've led regarding Native peoples, I find myself extremely tongue-tied and really at a loss of words because it's something that I feel so passionately about. And I find myself really just, I don't know, milling over in my mind what I should say and how I should say it. And, you know, am I being sensitive enough? Am I seeing things through the correct lens? And, you know, again, you're really helping us understand, just even at the very surface level, some of the deeper ideas and things that we don't know. You know, I have to be very transparent that this is an area, for my own knowledge base, that, you know, I'm embarrassed about, and it's up to me to do something about it. It's not up to me to ask you to do it for me. So, you know, again, you're speaking so much truth to power and really helping us again to shape some of the ideas in this conversation. Um, I want to talk about your art, okay? Because again, this is a seat at the table on behalf of the Des Moines Arts Festival, and our initial lead to you, how we found you and discovered you, so thankfully so, was about not you as an educator, not you as an Apache woman, not you as a uh, you know, somebody who's right in our backyard in Iowa, but as an artist, as a very amazingly talented artist. So talk about your art, talk about your music. And then if you can weave in with us how your identity that we talked about earlier plays in and weaves into the music that you create.
Sure. So yes, I'm a singer-songwriter. I write songs across genres just because for me personally, I see every song has its own personality. So if something sounds like a country song in my head, it's going to come out as a country song. I actually, the first time I wrote a rap song, I was just like, oh, who's going to believe this? 40-something-year-old woman. Now I'm 51, but at the time I'm like, who's going to believe this? And then I was like, Queen Latifah. Okay, I can do this, right? So it's just like whatever the song, I don't know, there's like an attitude for all the different genres of music. So it's just kind of blending the lyrics with the attitude of the sound, if that makes sense. But I do have drum songs that are influenced obviously from my culture. And then I've got drum songs mixed with modern sounds that are kind of a fusion blending. Um, so yeah, I just that's the way I think. I think of naming things. I think of like jewelry that I make a lot of times. I will name my jewelry just like you'd see a painting in a museum and it would have a name plaque underneath it. Um, so that's just the way I think. I think a lot of people looking at native artists tend to, again, going back to the boxes, put us in a box of, it's only drums and flutes, right, for music. And it has to be this style of jewelry. Otherwise, it's not native art. You're not a native artist, which is really ironic, because that doesn't apply to everybody else. If Irish Americans, like if they didn't do something with in the color green, you wouldn't say, oh, you're not really an Irish American artist. It's just a weird thing that happens with Native people. And to bring up music again, so the Grammys, well, let me go back. The Native American Music Awards was established in 1998 by a woman who worked with VH1, MTV, and she kind of was on this journey of self-discovery, ended up in South Dakota, met this group of musicians, Native musicians, and she was just like, why isn't there something for these musicians to get a public platform? So she created the Native American Music Awards, and this is back in 98. And she was instrumental in getting the Grammys to establish a category for Native American music. Well, that was 2001 when that happened. Well, the problem is the NAMMYs also said only drums and flutes, right? If you don't sound native, this is not native music. So there was very strict kind of parameters of what you could submit for native music. Well, in 2011, just 10 years later, they just canceled the category. They were like, we're not doing this anymore. So now if a native artist submits their music, it goes into Americana and blues, I think, something like that. Americana and something or another. There's two names for that category. But the Native American Music Awards have always said, we know you do a variety of, we have country music artists, we have rap artists, we have opera singers, we have, pop, rock, everything, and then more traditional sounds. And there's categories for all of those within the Native American Music Awards. So it's really an amazing platform for artists to say, hey, we're not all about flutes and drums. Yeah, you can listen to that here as well, but we're going to give you all that we got because we're as diverse as they come. So
Yeah, we talked a lot about that in one of our conversations, and you know, what kind of responses have you had from your audiences when you do the different genres of music? Because it sounds to me like you're very, you embrace a very diverse experience with music. You're willing to explore all different types and sounds and styles. How do Native people see your music? And then how does everyone else see your music and see you as an artist?
yeah, I think the feedback I've gotten, I'm primarily, okay, I'm a language instructor, I'm a linguist, I'm a wordsmith. So that's my first love language, if you want to put it that way, of expression in words and wordsmithing. And so people usually respond to lyrics. So like if I told you in our discussion, which I'm sure may come up in the next half hour, that part of the problem of US history is we're stuck in the past. And I mean, pun intended, we're stuck in the past. Nobody sees us beyond 200 years ago, 100 years ago. And so I wrote this lyric in a song called More. And the lyric is, my life is a relic. I sit by as they tell it, the story of my demise. Because it's just like, it's memorializing people, right? It's like, oh, this is what the Indians used to do. This is what they looked like. This is where they lived. And so people respond typically more to the lyrics that I write, and both native and non-native have responded to that. What's really cool is people who have, I try to write music that's encouraging, empowering, especially for kind of have these few women anthems too out there. And people respond to that. And I mean, I've had everything from a woman who was going through cancer treatment saying your music really comforted me, to another woman who had been raped and said, your music brought me healing. So that's what I love. That's what I love about music, that it can go places I can't. I love to travel around the world. I just can't do it. But, music has that power. Something about sound and lyric together is like oil running through the cracks of rocks, crevices. It goes deep into places that maybe just simple face-to-face words can't go. That's just my perspective on it anyway.
Oh, I love your perspective. I mean, I think, especially when it comes to some of the more difficult things that we as people have a hard time articulating, particularly when it comes to emotion, right? I think music and art, it opens up a whole different sort of dimension for us to travel through so that we actually get there. And these are places, like you said, crevices and deep places where words can't touch, because often the words are way too hard. It's too painful. It's too difficult. It's too cumbersome. It's too uncomfortable, right? Like we can go down a list of all the things that are so difficult for us to do in words. But music and art does have that way, and it's magical. Let me ask you this. When we think about how American Indian or Native art and culture and people, and you've really already taught me something so valuable today, and that's to understand that anything that we're talking about that has to do with Native anything is about the people. It is not distant with just art, just culture, just music. It is the people. And like you said, it's not just land, it's the people of the land, it's the people of the music, of the art. So how have Native people and that identity and influence impacted more broad things that we see in American culture, food, music, style, fashion, architecture. You were just showing me your beautiful jewelry and outfit, and you were explaining to me that that was from a Native designer. Talk to me about how you see all of this impacting who we are today.
Yeah, so let's see. Well, before we get to the art, I mean, even we talked about government, and I'm not very political. It sounds like I am. I keep talking about government, but the whole basis for the American government, the system we have, was based on the Iroquois Confederacy, which were six native nations coming together. And when the Constitutional Convention met, they had no models because Europe didn't have democracy like we know it. So they looked around at the people who were living in this land, and that's what inspired them. So even the creativity for organization and administration, because I'm going to call that creative too. People sometimes think they're administrative, they have no creative abilities. I'm like, no, there's creativity to bringing order from chaos. That is a creative gift. So that's one thing. If we're talking about food, I mean, corn and popcorn. Do I need to say more as Iowans here? Those are two beloved things that we have here in Iowa. Um, for music, I'm going to throw out again. There's a documentary called Rumble, Indians Who Rock the World. That's on Amazon Prime. It's a really good one. It talks about influences of native musicians, people that don't even know that they're native musicians that influence blues and jazz. Um, all rock and roll, all kinds of musical styles. So there's that one. People can go to the Native American Music Awards website and get music samples, check out different things. Styles and fashions, like so here, I'll stand up a little bit. This dress is from Jamie Okuma, who's Luiseño in Shoshone out of California. She does fashion, but she does amazing beadwork. She's got museum quality, like high heel boots, just really cool beadwork. And that's probably what she's most known for. Patricia Michaels was a finalist on season 11 of Project Runway. There's the Santa Fe Haute Couture fashion show that brings people from all over the world, including publications like Vogue and Forbes. And I was actually amazed and blessed and lucky to be able to walk in that fashion show for designers DeConti and Brown in 2019. That's a whole other backstory. But Akonov is another favorite of mine. He's a lot of his designs are based on the Pueblo pottery from his people. So really cool designs there. Architecture, I would say anything circular. Think outside the box. Don't put us in the box. Join the talking circle and the drum circle.
I love that. That's awesome. So before, we're gonna move on to a few other really interesting topics of conversation, but before we do that, tell us about your website. Tell us about how we can see you live. Daphne is going to, first of all, Daphne enjoyed your piece about even facilitators and people who sort of have Daphne's role are extremely creative. I saw a big smile on her face when you said that. But tell us about where we can see you. I know you just did a live concert in Marion, Iowa. Talk about your website and how we connect with you after today.
Okay, well, Daphne's just put up my website, so thank you, Daphne. Everybody's not doing too much live stuff lately. So that concert in Marion, I had two that were going to be back-to-back weekends and one canceled because of COVID. So as things come up, though, I'll put them on the website. I tell people, really, I don't get out as much as you would think. Anyway, even pre-COVID and maybe post-COVID. It's just because I teach, I'm an instructor at Kirkwood. I don't get to travel as much, so I'm kind of half time in both worlds. But I love to get out and do music when I can. So like I said, when things come up, I'll put it on my website, or I have a Facebook artist page also under Kelly Montijo Fink that people can check out there. Yeah, I guess just check out those two sites.
Thank you. We definitely want to know when you do live shows, because I think, like you said, the world is really trying hard to figure out how we can all spend time together again. So I know that when there are those opportunities, there would be people certainly in this audience who would have an interest in attending. And I think, if you ever had a virtual concert, we would certainly be interested in that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we do see lots of interesting Native representations in, oh gosh, all kinds of arenas. And I want to just talk about some things that, you know, are fairly mainstream that I think people will be familiar with. And I know even in my own experience, I might see something, watch something, and wonder, is that okay? I don't even know if that's okay. Like, would someone feel offended by this? Is this offensive? Is this a good representation? Is this a horrible representation? I think I typically know what's horrible, but I'm sure there's a host of people that had no idea that Tonto, right? That character that we see so many times, whether it's Disney or books or whatever. I'm sure many of us didn't know that, his name is stupid. And what is that saying?
Right.
So, you and I talked about Longmire. People that know me know I'm a big Longmire fan. Daphne and I are, well, Daphne's been a Yellowstone fan for a while, but I'm a new Yellowstone fan. We see the Disney depictions, whether that's Peter Pan, Pocahontas. We can go down a list. I recently saw what I believe, and I'm not really sure if this was the actual title, but it was The Lone Ranger, and it was played by Johnny Depp, and I believe that's the Disney production. I thought that was really interesting. The Atlanta Braves, they were recently in the news, about the World Series. And of course, the Washington Redskins, they changed their name, a few years back. I just threw a whole lot at you, but whatever you want to talk about in any of that, we'd love to listen to it. And I have had this conversation with Kelly before, and was absolutely engaged in what she was saying. So any of those things that you'd like to share with us from your perspective, we'd love to listen.
Okay, well, let's hit it straight on with mascots, since there's some costuming that goes on with mascots too. As a linguist, this is my perspective. And I do believe a lot of Native peoples have this perspective. I know a few who don't, but the word mascot, talking about tonto means Spanish, in Spanish means stupid. Mascot comes from Spanish as well, mascota, and it means pet. So when we go back to the whole idea of less than human, beast, savage, whatever you want to phrase it, it's still referring to somebody as not human. So sports teams having mascots, there's really about having pets, right? There's not equal play there. And so that, for me, from a language standpoint, that's where I have a problem, right? And there's caricatures then of how Native people are perceived. And really the whole idea, you never see a mascot in any sport that's anything other than Plains natives, right? There's a reason for that. We don't see Pacific Southwest, we don't see woodlands in the Southeast part of the United States, or southeastern coast. The reason is because of and we go to theater and entertainment again, the Buffalo Bill Wild West show. That started in 1883 and didn't end until 1913. So 30-year run all across the United States and even into Europe. And the ones that were represented in the show were Plains style regalia. Regalia is what we call our clothing. It means royal robes. And people would put on the regalia before they went out to battle to show honor even to their enemies. So what you see represented in mascots and the sports teams is the Plains style of dress and war bonnets and buckskin and all those kind of things. So it's very, again, it's relegated to this is what Native people look like, this is what they sound like, this is what they act like, and it's something based on the past, but it's a limited view and not accurate view, right? So I had some recent conversations, or not so long ago, but conversations with Marion High School, myself and another commissioner from the Iowa Commission on Native American Affairs a few years back, went to Marion High School because at the time they were called the Marion Indians. And we were invited to speak to this English composition class and field questions and things like that. And this one question that this young man had was a common one. And it was, well, why can't we just keep our mascot and show that we're honoring the people? And I said, how many Native people do you know? None. How can you honor a people you don't know? Right? If I know nothing about you, I don't know your preferences, your likes, your dislikes. It's impossible. I would say it's impossible because our filter will say this is honor, but it's not how they receive honor. It's like when you're giving gifts to somebody, right? If you don't know the person well, you just go, here's a gift card because I don't know you. But if you know the person well, you have a relationship, you can get that gift that touches their heart because you know them. There's relationship. And that was part of my point. There's no relationship. How can you honor people that you don't have a relationship with? Now, of all of the sports teams you mentioned, there is one exception, and that's the Florida Seminoles. The Seminole tribe of Florida has come in partnership with Florida State University, and they are constant talks with the athletic department about their representation and what they'll look like as a Seminole mascot. Now, I don't particularly care for that because it's still referring to them as mascots, right? Pets. But they've made this agreement, and maybe part of it's monetary, right? For how they will be represented on the field. So that's a one distinction of all the other sports teams that we could mention. That's the one exception.
That was very interesting, and I every time I listen to you talk, I learn something new. There's always a new takeaway for me. So today I've had so many pauses because I'm just sort of soaking in everything you're saying, and I'm not hardly able to say the next thing. Talk a little bit about Longmire. And I mean, one, I am a Longmire fan, so this is a little bit selfish of me, but when we talked about it, you did say some really interesting things about Longmire, and I think it might be interesting to our audience. What were the things that you found that you think are unique about the show, and that you might share with us, just sort of to, again, highlight some of the parts of our conversation today?
Yeah, so I haven't seen Yellowstone, so I'll preemptively say that. I did like Longmire because the show shows Native peoples as multidimensional, not just flat, right? And I think that's what you enjoy about the show too. And then you have these relationships. You do have tribal goings on, and then you have the community, but they intersect, they interact, and it's not always, sometimes there's tension, and then you have this beautiful friendship between Longmire and what's his name? Because you
Henry Standing Bear.
Henry Standing Bear. Yes, I couldn't think of his name. So I love that, and we're seeing more shows, more productions with Native people directly involved. So again, I'm going to give a recommendation. Rutherford Falls, which is on Peacock, amazing show. You will see natives portrayed in ways you've not seen them, like a father talking to a daughter. I mean, something simple, but it's so beautiful. And we're not used to seeing that. We're used to seeing a stereotype or a limited view of a Native person. That's a comedy, and it's really well written, well done. Another one is Reservation Dogs. That's a grittier side of reservation life. But there's, again, the people involved in the writing of these shows are Native people. So they're telling their stories. So that's really significant. And I didn't say this before, I meant to say it before, but I wanted to thank you all for not only a seat at the table, but a voice at the table, because you can be invited to sit at the table and not be allowed to speak. I've been there before. So I wanted to thank you for allowing my voice to be at the table as well. So that's what's happening now with a lot of productions and shows and things like that. There's still those things from the past, like the power of Disney has affected and in some cases infected the world. I was in Lima, Peru, walking in the plaza, the main plaza in Lima, in Peru, with other native folks. We were kind of doing this cultural tour, and I just hear out of the blue, Pocahontas, and I'm like, really? Disney goes everywhere, and it's a limited view, right? We talk about theater productions, Peter Pan, even though there's fictional natives, you know, theaters still put this on, en masse all over the country, and native peoples are portrayed the same way over and over again, and it's this limited, stuck in the past view of how we're portrayed. Annie Get Your Gun is another production. Music Man is another one. So it's just like, what are directors going to do with that? What are costumers going to do with that? I've in the past actually volunteered for a local theater that was doing Peter Pan, and I said, I know you're doing this production. I'm Apache. I would gladly help as a, like give you feedback for what you're doing so that costuming is accurate, even though this is fictional. Even dance, because there's a kind of a dance number that's incorporated in there. So you're showing something that's looks a little more authentic than cartoonish, and had no reply from the choreographer, director, or musical director. And it's like people don't want to go there. I don't know why, because I think theater is one of those places like we want to be progressive. We want to show what's real and what's true, but there's still this weird mindset of like, no, this is the way you are, and we're going to keep you here. And it's uncomfortable to talk about changing what that might look like. And I don't know why.
I don't know why either. And I think this is something that one of the reasons I absolutely adore you, and I love I hang on to every word you say, because I find it so, I don't know, it sparks curiosity for me, and it makes me very aware of the gap in my own understanding and education. So, of course we want you to not only have a seat, but a voice. And, like I said in the beginning, that is one of the reasons why we started this, A Seat at the Table series, is to not just uplift causes and issues and topics, but people, real people with real voices. We're going to run out of time, but I do have one last question. And this is a tough question. Last couple of years, and we can go way back, right? But if we focus on recent times, our country is going through a lot of challenges with race relations right now. And we've seen all kinds of different movements and currents pop up with prominence and big voices. The Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, LGBTQ. And these are hugely important conversations and movements and topics, issues, concerns. But amidst all of those very prominent big voices, I cannot help but ask the question, why aren't we making a bigger deal about the Native voice? Why does this voice in my now I said I wasn't going to give opinions. This is probably the only opinion I have for today. But I strongly feel as though the Native voice is underheard, undersung, underrepresented. I mean, I could go on and on with all of the things that I feel so strongly about. And part of the reason why I'm so passionate about this particular event, why is this? And you shared with me a little bit, just a touch and said that in many minds, the American memory feels as though this topic has been put to rest by the reservation system. And you expanded on a number of different things, but in the last minutes that we have, I mean, what do you see here? Why does the Native voice continue to get sort of, I don't want to say sidelined, but that's what it feels like to me. And what can we do? It's not, and this is part of the problem, right? With that box checking, all of these voices are important. And we want to focus on inclusion, but we keep dividing. We keep dividing. We keep all of these histories separate. And we're so it's crazy to me. We want to be more inclusive, but we continue to divide. And when we do that, certain voices get left behind. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the first step really is to listen to other people's stories that are different than you. And it is that issue of being stuck in the past. And but things keep coming up to the surface, though. This is really interesting because, I mean, obviously the residential schools has come up in the news. National news has actually spoken of it. Now we're talking about finally having a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which has been the case in countries like Canada and South Africa and Rwanda about genocide, right? What's interesting is that the US did issue a formal apology to Native Americans, and this was back in 2009, but it was listed in a Senate appropriations bill for defense spending. It was embedded in it. And nobody told the natives. It wasn't until somebody was looking through this thing going, wait a minute, what is this? And why is it here? And why didn't anybody tell anybody? So it's kind of like if a tree falls in a forest, right? Does anybody hear it? If there's an apology made and the recipients aren't there to get it, is it really an apology? And part of that, I understand, again, is political, because then are you responsible for reparations? Or there's a whole bunch of questions that come up with that. So then what do you do with that? So that's the whole idea of, we're not going away. There's issues that are coming up. Now it's the residential schools that are being talked about, and no public school should have a cemetery on its property. And hundreds of children that were killed in these residential schools, these children that were taken away from their families in the name of save the man and kill the Indian, which was the mantra. Those things, we're having to look in the mirror and face to face and say, what do we do with this? Missing and murdered Indigenous women. Everybody was talking about Gabby Petito the last month, but thousands of women have gone missing. Some have been discovered murdered in Canada and the US for the past couple decades. I mean, for that number to be so high in a population, that's smaller, that should scream at people. And part of the issue there is jurisdiction, tribal jurisdiction versus other jurisdictions. So for example, if a man commits a crime against a woman on tribal land, he can't be prosecuted because he's not native on tribal land. So now we're looking at things like Violence Against Women Act. I'm really not that political. It sounds like I am. I just know stuff about a few things, and I appreciate Kate saying you're the expert, brilliant, but I'm like, I'm not, I just know a few things. But so these are questions like, why doesn't it get a voice? Why is it not heard on the national news? We're still uncomfortable. We're still uncomfortable talking about our past. There's some really good other recommendations I can make. One of them called We the People by Mark Charles. That's a YouTube. You can find that on YouTube. He did a TED Talk. He's a Dene man talking about why we the people doesn't mean we all the people. And another one was actually a speech given by Kevin Gover, and it was at the Des Moines Arts Center. And this was a couple of years ago. It's called Why Americans Should Unlearn Their History. It's a little tongue in cheek, but he's got some good points there. He's not a mean guy either. He's just titled to get the attention of people. So yeah, those are some good recommendations for further revelation, understanding, study if you want to go there.
Thank you, Kelly. And, part of the reason I say you're brilliant is because you're willing to use your voice. Not only, right, do we want to make sure you have a seat at the table, but make sure you have a voice, but then you're also willing to share your voice. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And I'm greatly appreciative for what you've given us all today. Your time, your talent, your thoughts, and quite frankly, a lot of who you are and your identity. So there isn't, there just aren't enough words that I can say to thank you. I'm going to stumble over this closing because again, for some reason, I become completely speechless when it comes to this conversation. And I think, like I said, it's emotional for me. There's guilt there because I know that I could do better. I know that I haven't exercised my full power to educate myself in the ways that I should. So, like I said, I'm going to stumble over the ending. I'm always touched and moved by you in this conversation. So, again, thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you to all of you who've tuned in with us today. We hope to continue this series in 2022. We are having discussions about that right now, but certainly we hope that you join us in the future. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you all for coming. I appreciate everyone who came to listen. Thank you.